Yeah. All right, man. Another day to talk about swimming.
No.
No?
We can't say that because everybody's going to turn us off completely. They probably skipped over the last two. They're like, oh, I'm going to skip this one. Like they fast forward to the first 10 or 15 minutes of every podcast. They're like, nope, swimming, nope, swimming, nope. No, we're back at you today, but it's not going to be about swimming. It is, however, Thursday, January 29th, 2026. Welcome aboard, everybody. You're listening to the Crushing Iron Podcast. This is episode 905.
Yeah, it is. Not 804.
Not 805.
It's funny how we just kind of...
I know, right? Like, when you're doing this long, you're like, something like, man, like, maybe it's an 804. Like, no, 101 more than that. Yeah, back to 905. I'm just going to stop guessing because, like, you got, like, your trusty notepad out there, but sometimes we have to go back and look. But, yeah, when we're not worried about metrics or comparison, right? Sometimes we're just waking up and doing it every Tuesday and Thursday, hopping on here for, the best hour we can, or hour-ish. But no swimming today, no swim talk. I don't want to bore you guys again. We have gotten some pretty good feedback about it, but yeah, I mean, given the fact that it's pretty snowy and icy and chilly, and the majority of you are, avoiding the pool like the plague right now anyway, or the pool's even closed. And I do gotta say, like, I'm sure you hear this too, right? Like, we get lots of, like, the typical pool excuses. Lifeguard didn't show up, forgot my swimsuit, forgot my goggles, forgot my watch, forgot my, swim P3 player. The lane was too crowded. There's too many people there. The heater's broken. Or it's closed, for maintenance. And it's like, I got a one yesterday. It was the first one ever. Pulled out of the pool yesterday because the lifeguard couldn't find his testing strips. So that one's been used.
Solid.
So you can, right?
We could do a whole cast on swim excuses.
Exactly, right? You could do a whole cast on swim excuses in general. So listen, put that one in your pocket. If you're not coached by us and you want to slide that one in, like, boom, done. Like, just say, hey, went to the pool today and I was pumped. I was ready to go. Lifeguard came out. He was like, I don't have any testing strips. The water looks clear, but we can't have you swim today. It's not like chlorine doesn't kill basically, half our body anyway when we hop in the pool. But like, yeah, can't do it. Got to do the testing strips. You can treat that largely like you do, swims where you just, you're like, hey man, forgot my watch today, but completed as planned. You're like, sure you did.
Yeah.
Because there's a very high likelihood you hit that completed as planned, leaning back in the recliner, listening to one of your favorite podcasts, like watching something, you're like, yeah, let's see. Yeah, didn't quite make it today. Completed as planned. Edit duration. Boom. Here we go. 20 minutes or 2K swim, 2K done. You're welcome. Moving on. And I'm on fire today.
Yeah, but that guilt will stay with you, if you do that. Just, you can't get away with that karmically.
No.
Do you remember that time that lifeguard jumped on me when I was swimming?
I do.
They did what do they call them, random emergency, where they threw a dummy in the deep end, and I was just swimming laps, and the guy just jumped on my legs.
This was East Nashville pool, right?
Yes.
Not the downtown.
Yes. Yeah. They kept doing it, and I was like, what? Because he blew the whistle. I was the only guy in there.
Yeah,
blowing the whistle, and I might stop, and then one time
he
jumped on me, and then I got mad. I fired my pull buoy into the wall. I was a little testier back then, but
was that one of your Friday night swims too? Like,
could have been Friday Night Losers Club for sure.
Yeah, I mean, who doesn't want to end their week, right? Getting sumo splashed by the lifeguard at the YMCA.
It was just so bizarre.
Who doesn't want this? It's funny, like, we'll talk about cycling here in a minute, but it's like they incur a huge risk when they do that, because when I worked for Ocean Rescue Squad, like, they were like like all of the moves that you do in practice about how to come up behind a swimmer, as if they're panicking and drowning, you're expecting them to fight. Like, they don't want to be pulled and dragged. Like, they're going to fight and, like, try to bring you down. So, like, man, if I saw you swimming on a Friday night, I'm not blowing the whistle and jumping on you. I'd fear for my life. And I mean, like, it's and like, you see exactly the guy is dialed in. He's here on a Friday night. Like, you're not here on a Friday night. Like, there's only two types of Friday night swimmers, right? There's the Friday night swimmer who was like you know, dedicated, in the zone, that first Ironman fear, you know, I'm going to do this, and I don't even really want to do it, but I'm going to do it just to say that I did it, knowing that you're not, and you're going to be like, oh, that guy's in the zone, right? That you got that kind of swimmer, and then you've got the other Friday night swimmer who's just, you know, lonely, broken, probably like midway through a divorce or a relationship breakup. Like there's no other option.
Good point.
I mean, there really isn't. There's that, you know, they're like, I'm going to go drown my sorrows and not go to the bar. I'm going to go drown them in the YMCA pool. And there's that one. And then there's the other. There's really no in-betweener on the Friday night. And I would say like 4 o'clock. I'm going to start early. 4 p.m. on a Friday on. That's the only two types of swimmer you're going to find.
Jesus.
I mean, am I wrong?
No, I can't think any.
I was going to say, you can't disagree with me on that.
No.
Because it's not
tough.
like anybody looks their weekly schedule and they're like happy as a clam and like midway motivated. And they're like, ooh, let's see. Oh, well, hey, look, dude, that 6:30 slot on Friday is open, baby. Can't think of a better way to end my week than to head on over to the pool.
Yeah, nothing like completing a shitty day or week of work and going to the Y.
Exactly, right? So yeah, there's the only two types of swimmers. I'm sure we'll get a lot of feedback. Well, not really. We won't get any feedback.
We'll get no
I'm sure
feedback.
thinking like, hey, that's not me. Or you're like, is that me? Like, which one am I? I mean, listen, but whatever gets you the pool, whether it's relationship troubles or commitment, just get the pool. Okay. Take the lessons, hopefully, that you learned and some of the things we talked about in the podcast the last week, and apply those. Again, had a lot of good feedback. Hope you guys appreciated those. But we figured, again, not to lose our entire listener base with more swimming talk, we thought, you know, a little bit about cycling today. And as we talked about with swimming, right, we've kind of been the theme and the message of the podcast, I guess, over the last 2 weeks is, you know, the time of year that we're in right now, and, you know, largely focused on, you know, we talked about technique, you know, in swimming and the importance of it and how it correlates to economy and efficiency. And that's such a huge thing, right, in swimming, because it is so technique based. And then you look at cycling, right? And cycling, to me, of the three disciplines that we do in triathlon, that is the easiest from a form standpoint, at least from the you know, the waist down, right? One could argue that the positions that you need to work on to adopt, right, with neck strength and your hand position and holding arrow, like your postural position, the core strength, the lower back, you know, stand, like those things need time. That is a skill, right? That is a technique. And that takes time to get and can lead to, right, efficiency, less watts, or excuse me, less power having to generate with better, you know, return on your investment because you're more aerodynamic. You could argue that, but just from like the waist down, right? Cycling is the easiest, right? You're attached to, if you got clip-in pedals, you know, your feet are fixed to a platform that allows you to spin 360 degrees, right? So it's not that challenging from a technique. Yes, you need to make sure if you have a proper fit, you really don't have to think. If you don't, you know, maybe you got to think about making sure my knees aren't, you know, going all the way out or going all the way in. You know, there's obviously smaller things to work on, like, you know, engaging the back half of your pedal stroke and making sure you're even. But again, going back to the skill piece, like on the cycling part of it, right now is a great time of year. Again, like you don't want to be hammering yourself with, you know, endless 2 to 3 to 4 hour, you know, like, you know, zone 1, zone 2 rides. Yes, building that aerobic base is important, but, you know, there's ways that you can change things up. But I've always found, and, you know, we've always been a huge fan of cadence change. We got plenty of podcasts on how not to suck at cycling, big gear work, you know, cadence, but having a wide range, just like, you know, distance per stroke in swimming is kind of like the big gear of cycling. And then, you know, sprint, high turnover swimming is like the equivalent of high RPM. Like you need to be able to have both in both ranges, because they both are skills, right? And the more skills you have, the more robust your toolbox is within that discipline. And one of my favorite things about working through like the two ends of the cadence range, right? Not just the lower cadence, which I think is probably what we talk about the most because we're just fans of torque work and big gear work in cycling, especially for a longer distance triathlon. But even in like high RPM, you know, like, and you know, you're probably thinking, oh, what's high RPM? Well, for some of you, it might be like 70, But like, Rebecca,
Yeah.
like he's like, I'm a low cadence guy. I hover around 32, and you're like, oh, that's not. We need to crank that up a little bit, So, but yeah, to me, like higher cadence is like above 85, right? And so, but short course, that's what you need. And this is, I would guess most people know this already, but the highest power you're able to generate is going to be at over 95, most likely over 100 RPM, right? You cannot generate your max power at a low RPM. It has to be, from a velocity standpoint, you have to generate more power through higher turnover, higher cadence. So having that ability is great. So things like, 30-30s, 40-20s, like short VO2 max hit where you're hitting that power number, but you're not feeling it from a respiratory rate. Like, to me, that's like the Mona Getty run that we talk about. Like, you go hard for a minute, you spin the legs, cadence is high, that helps you be efficient. You're generating higher power. You know what it feels like to generate that higher power. You know what it's like to recruit those fast twitch muscle fibers that are very important to keep them engaged and, not let them go completely dormant year round, which is what a lot of athletes do. But by the time you're done with like that 30, your heart rate, we talked about this before, your heart rate is usually the highest within like the first 5 seconds of the actual rest interval. So you never get like completely out of breath. It's more about firing and just working your way through those cadences. Really, it helps. One, you have to focus, right? It's sometimes you have to be very, very, because if not, you'll just drift down. And some people will say like, oh, I can't get above 85. Well, then the likelihood is that you're not focusing enough, and two, you probably got your gear way too hard. Like one of the very first workouts that I ever gave is like this high RPM skill workout. And I just told people like, hop on the trainer and don't even attach the flywheel to it. And they're like, how hard could this be? And then they work their way through like 70, 75, 80, 100, 90 RPMs. But when there's no tension and you have to hold that and you have to hold the form and you have to pedal in the full circle, you don't have that pressure of the flywheel. It's actually more challenging.
It's like controlling your body running downhill.
Yes, that's a great way. It's a great way to put it. It's like, oh, that's easier. And you're like, no, it's not. Like, you have to be even more engaged because it's just, you're having to fire on all things, the push off, the landing, what you're doing with your legs before you actually, plant. It's just it recruits the fibers that you need to recruit, right? And also, like, I've also found that it's a very, very good way to simulate the cadence you need when you want to run faster, because you need a higher cadence to run faster. And so doing that and kind of practicing that with cycling before you do that a ton in running, so you're not plodding along and taking these giant long strides, you're not doing it too short. Like skill development cycling, and again, like starting off with doing it short, just like we talk about in swimming. Like if you're learning a new skill, if you're trying to be more efficient, again, full 360 pedal stroke, like just like we talk with distance per stroke in swimming. If you're only getting like 65% of that stroke, and you can move that to going, 90%, well, then for every 2 strokes you're now taking, you're gaining a third stroke of what you used to do, right? Because there's a 30% plus improvement. If you were getting 60, now you're getting 90. That's a whole extra stroke. That's an insane level of like improved efficiency and economy. Same thing goes with cycling, right? And that's why I see so many people have like different levels of soreness. They hop outside, like, the trainer is listen, it's got tons of perks, right? It's convenient. It's, you can do it quickly. You don't have to worry. It's safer. There's endless amounts of positive training. But one of the things that I find a lot of times with athletes and the trainer is that they never engage like that back end 6 o'clock to 11 o'clock portion of their stroke. They just simply, if you're on your bike and you're pushing down from a 12 o'clock to 6 o'clock position on the right, you're not pulling up on the right. You're simply bringing your right up because you're pressing down on the left from the same position. So just getting that engagement, right? So you're getting a full pedal stroke. That is efficiency. And you can do that with high RPM work, and you can also do it with low RPM work. It's just going to feel different and be a different stimulus.
Yeah, that's I'm glad you started with that. I think riding outside, I think we can definitely get, the trainer, I'm on it a lot. I love it. I think it's a huge piece of my puzzle. But like you said, when you get outside, it's different, and you can get lazy on the trainer and kind of not be ready for, it's just like terrain change and things like that just really start impacting you. So I've always been a big fan of keeping things simple. So when I'm outside riding or whatever and I see a hill, I just kind of blast it and something like that and then recover over and then, always toying around with cadence and things like that and messing up my gears and kind of trying to settle into the wrong gear or whatever. And I was talking to somebody about the other day about riding in Wisconsin and my last couple of rides, how I haven't really felt like I've been in the right place I felt okay, and I think ultimately it just comes down to I wasn't strong enough and I wasn't, as I guess, used to practicing hills and things like that. But it was interesting because I was thinking about like how many times at Wisconsin, for example, there's the hills are punchier, right? Like, and I could get up them, but like maybe there's 20 or 30 of them where you're kind of blasting down and you get into the next one, you're kind of up to the top, but then you got to really go to the well. I think the best cyclists don't have that feeling. You know what I mean? They kind of just don't have to go as deep and they get up in it and they're like strong enough to get over it. And I think that's what happens to me as I start chipping away, those little chinks all throughout the day and they just add up and stuff like that. But for the trainer, I think I got a little bit lazy with it. It's easy to get into this, like, build aerobic base all the time. And I kind of got into that. And, there's one of our workouts is kind of, 30-minute big gear, 1 minute off, so it's this like constant gear changing and people really don't like that. But I think that's important to do on the trainer too. It's sort of like you got to create that outdoor feeling a little bit because it's never really the same outside, especially on a course like that. But just the idea of being able to adjust and like you're saying, almost just be able to relax into what that new gear is and things like that. I remember I'd go to the trace and I would just kind of be in the wrong gear, climbing a lot just to try to get used to that sort of thing. And I think we can simulate that on the trainer and I think it's a good thing, but that full pedal stroke, that's one of those things where I've always been good at that backside because that just came from that mountain bike background. I was always climbing and that was what I got taught, sort of like you got to get that whole crank around, you got to be really engaged throughout the whole thing just to get up some of these steep hills. And so I tend to do that probably more than not. I'm not like a mash my quads kind of guy. I almost have to force myself to do that more often.
Yeah. I mean, I remember listening to you talk, and I think this was, a lot of the same things we discussed, obviously, but a different discipline. We talked about swimming, was that ability to have a higher stroke turnover is allowing you and enabling you to have the ability to be responsive.
Yes.
So if you're in open water, whether you know it or not, right, and there's a current, that you're swimming against, I remember one of the very first races I know you ever did, and many that I watched at the Music City Triathlon when it was in the Cumberland River, is like there was that one year where there was swimming upstream and like people were going nowhere, if not backwards. Same thing with Chattanooga when they had it upstream, because you don't know how to change your stroke rate. It's the same. And that's fine if you're in a pool, but if you're not in a pool and you have to respond, right, to the environment, you need to be able to respond without having to actually think through how to respond. It has to become innate. It has to become part of who you are, not just mentally, right, but also how your body responds. Like, how do you engage? What do you engage? How do you get from point A to B and what is required? You have to be responsive, right? So you have to have that high turnover rate or ability to have a high turnover when needed in open water. Same thing goes for cycling. I mean, I think that's some of the first things I ever noticed when we would ride together, just how quickly you would respond. And it wasn't that you thought, and it wasn't even necessarily a gear change. It was just like you were just very responsive. And that is it's such a underrated skill to have in cycling that makes you feel like more of an all-around athlete on a bike, right? Not just a triathlete. And I think that's where, more experienced, better trained, outside more often cyclists are more like athletes on a bike versus triathletes, right? Because and I think responsiveness is both a physical and a cognitive skill, right? And I know, right, that the amount of time that we spend, right, on the trainer, largely, right, in fixed gears or in erg mode or without having to think, right? We don't have to worry about traffic and turns and debris and, cadence changes or terrain changes. You're just like stuck and you just do it and you don't even think. And I do think as many positives, right, and pluses and even training benefits as the trainer has, right? I think one of the biggest drawbacks is the numbing of your cognitive ability to talk to your body and respond without thinking, because you can not think, really. Like you can just put on like a Netflix show and watch like an hour straight in erg mode, and you honestly like don't have to think. And while I think that is, I think there's maybe a place for that if you've had like a long day and you're not mentally in it, you just kind of want to check out and do the work. Got it, support it. I get it, right? It's better than doing nothing. And sometimes the lightening of that mental load, right, is very important, right? Because it also eliminates stress and allows you to perform better and should allow you to recover better, right? Because all added stress is added stress. And I think that's something we also don't think about, like when we do a 3 hour ride at 180 inside is not the same as a 3 hour ride at 180 outside, right? Conditions. And then I do think that it's underrated, the additional stress, not just the upper body energy used, right? From muscular, from having to hold on to the bike and hold your core tighter, right? To manage turns and cars and, the occasional debris, right? And making sure you avoid the rumble strips or whatever it is you're doing. Like that is obviously, physical fatigue, but also I don't think that we add in or even consider the overall mental fatigue that you have, right? It's the same thing as like driving, right? It's like there's an enormous mental fatigue that stresses you out and can drain you. So it'll take longer for you to recover. So again, positives and negatives, right? Because you don't have to recover right after a race because you're not racing the next day, but it still depletes your energy system. And so like there are things that we do, I think, in the indoor trainer that allow us to even further, distance ourselves from being able to, respond just out of habit, right? Just like learning a technique in the pool by doing 25s and 50s and starting over, doing some of these things mindlessly on the trainer without being responsive, right? And that's why I think some of these like, Zwift or Training Peaks virtual races come in handy where, someone attacks, you have to go immediately. You can't just fall back, right? And I think that's, again, like it's not a skill that most triathletes need to have, right? Unless you're doing, short course ITU draft legal stuff. You need to be responsive. But if you're not doing that, yes, do you need to have that kind of responsiveness on a day-to-day, everyday race course? No. But is it a great skill to have? 100%. To not to think, but to be able to hit a gear and generate power, or not even be able to hit a gear and generate higher RPM, higher power down. Like that's why, like mountain bikers are some of the best cycles in the world. They're doing 120 RPM for 10 seconds and then all of a sudden they're doing like 35. Like the responsiveness and the level of engagement and how they can switch between muscle fiber types. Obviously, they're all recruited at the same time. It's just the leverage between, fast twitch versus slow twitch is what's getting engaged. The pendulum just kind of swings depending on the amount of power you're putting out and the amount of RPMs you're putting out, and how those like mesh together. But it's just an incredible skill to have. And I find like, again, like just like we talked about swimming, like these two for me are the biggest like confidence boosting. And I think we really underestimate that in terms of like building that complete triathlete profile or cyclist profile or athlete profile within endurance sports is, I never hear anybody I'm sure you probably haven't heard either, maybe you have, but with athletes, they're like, yeah, I'm really nervous and worried about the run. I'm worried something's going to happen. I'm worried about I'm going to crash. I'm going to trip over a rock. Like I'm going to have a panic attack. No. It's always the swim. I'm worried I'm going to have a panic attack. I'm worried it's going to take too much out of me. I'm worried I'm not going to be able to finish. I'm worried it's not going to be wetsuit legal. On the bike, it's, I'm worried I'm going to drop my nutrition. I'm worried I'm going to crash. I'm worried I'm not going to have a change of flat. I'm worried that someone's going to hit me. I'm worried, all these things. Like, then they get off the bike and they're like, I just got to run. Even though it's like the hardest one on your body, you just don't have that. And I think, again, like just building up that confidence reservoir and making you feel like an athlete and learning the skill, right? To do, because listen, it's all a system, right? It all, the higher your ceiling, right? Your VO2 max, the higher your ceiling, and then the lower your floor you can make, like the larger the capacity you have to generate work. So that's a good thing. And like, obviously there's a lot of ways to do that, but you can't generate the power needed that you have to express to raise your VO2 max with a 55 cadence. You just can't. And you can generate a quote unquote higher power for you, but the power that you need to produce to raise it, right? To raise your ceiling, even at threshold, like you can't hold for a long period of time the same, watt range at threshold with a very low, like 50 to 60 RPM as you can at 75, 80, 85, 90. And I think like one of the best questions to kind of ask yourself right now is at what cadence range, like, do I start to see the biggest level of fatigue? If I'm doing, and that largely can tell you what you need to work on. If you're, and maybe you can, go out and, and quiz yourself, and do a little bit of a test. Is like, hey, I'm going to ride for, 10 minutes with an RPM of 60, take a break, 10 minutes of RPM of, 80, take a break, and then, 10 minutes at same watts with an RPM, with a range of 95. And then just kind of measure, like, is it, because I think you should know this feeling. I'm sure most of us have this feeling, is like, am I fatiguing from a muscular standpoint? Like, are my quads burning? Are my calves burning? I'm finding it hard to turn the pedals, or is it neuromuscular fatigue? And I think that is the key indicator for me. Like, if you're doing big gear and you start to have these, like, severe, like, skips in your pedal stroke, like these big gaps, like that's neuromuscular fatigue. You're not able to continue to handle and manage that same level of torque that with the power you want to for the full pedal stroke. Same goes for like the higher RPM stuff. If you start to like not be able to maintain that power, that's more of a neuromuscular deficiency you have in being able to have. And again, you're not going to race at that RPM on every end, but it does, right? Just like we work our way through zones 1 through 5 or whatever your zone model is, we do the same thing with cycling. And the same thing with RPMs. Like, you need to be able to manage all those zones. Again, it just makes your cycling toolbox more robust. And again, not just from, the neuromuscular standpoint and the power, but also just from like the mental piece of it that you have to, at one point, right, January, February, March, think through how, and like you're not even watching anything. A lot of times if I've done these RPM work and I might have like, Training Peaks Virtual or Zwift on the screen, like I don't even look at it. I just like have my head down. Like it's sometimes like when I get like above 105, I'm legit looking at my legs. I'm like, all right, you just got to keep like going over and going over. You have to like, that's how hard you have to think to like get it over. Right. It's like the equivalent of like, when you feel like you're kind of lost, you're not sure where you're going in the car. What do? You turn the music down. You're like, I gotta focus, right? Not that the music is like gonna make you see where you need to go, but you're like, let me turn the music down. Hold on, I gotta figure out where I'm going. Like, you have to do that at these higher levels. Even the lower levels is like, I like look down at my legs. I'm like, all right, you gotta just keep spinning out. You gotta keep making it work. You gotta keep making it happen. And then you get to the point to where you don't even think about it. And I think, again, like, this is the time to do that. And it's just, I think it's a very underrated skill to have. And again, I've actually never thought about it until we started talking today, the disparity that we continue to make between, the brain body connection and the natural response we have that just clicks, right? Like, it just happens immediately. It's now is just what we do versus, the trainer, we don't have to think. But when you get outside and you can't help but think, or I can ask yourself, and I bring this up a lot in, for better or for worse, when you look at, races and you see people crash and they want to blame it on bad road conditions or potholes or whatever. I'm like, a lot of it, like largely, I believe is just from, like, you can't respond quick enough, right? You're not used to responding to, potholes or debris or a rock or a rider who can't keep from swerving, right? Because your reaction time is so much slower, right? Yes, there's always going to be, good road conditions, but largely, like, you're just not paying attention. And I think that's a skill, right? And I think how much more confident you can have by doing that. And the best cyclists have that.
Well, you touched on something right there toward the end when you're using that analogy of in the car and turning on the radio. And what I'm about to say might be a bit controversial here. It's about
let's go.
Let's go.
Right, let's go.
You're in, huh?
Finally, 905 podcasts, and we're finally going to bring up something controversial.
Yeah,
let's
right.
do it.
This is but anyway, so I've been kind of on this mission to be consistent lately for the last month or so, and in the mornings especially, and just trying to sort of change my dynamic a little bit. And so one of the things I've been doing is I've been, using the treadmill every morning, either walking or running or some combination of both or whatever, and, trying to sit in meditation. I'm doing a lot of different things in the morning and writing and whatever. But the reason I bring that up is because this is going to tie in to cycling and what you're saying, because basically my thought on the bike is you need to ride the bike and not let the bike ride you. And I feel like that's sometimes what happens on the trainer. And it can happen. And so the point of this whole thing is I have been doing this. So on Monday, on Monday, I did a treadmill workout. And then on Wednesday I did the exact same one, but like over time I've been playing either music or some kind of inspirational, like, YouTube shit to listen to or whatever, whenever I'm on the treadmill. And Wednesday I got on there and I was about 4 minutes in and I realized I didn't turn on anything. I was just doing it with myself, no sound, nothing. And I was like, that's it, man. That's what I've been looking. Those are the little things that I'm looking for. And we talked about it before about how, music running is all good and everything. But I think ultimately I knew that that's not what I want. I'd rather, back in the day I used to run without it all the time. And then I kind of got into it because it was sort of like I needed it, like as a hit, a dopamine or some kind of jack me up kind of.
Yeah, like caffeine. Get me out the door. Give me some energy.
You always, yeah, right, exactly. So deep down that that's a crutch. And I've always thought about that on the, because it just is easier for me to run when music's on. So I'm like, okay, something, it's like drives me or something. It's propulsion. And so the other day I noticed that I wasn't listening to it, and I'm like, I'm going to just keep rolling because I felt like I was like, wow, this means I feel like I'm kind of connected to something right now. So I roll with it. About halfway through, I'm like, okay. I knew that my breathing was easier, and I knew that my heart rate was down. I just knew it. I could just tell. Same exact workout on Wednesday as I did on Monday, and I waited till I was done. I checked it. My heart rate was like 13 beats average lower for the same exact thing 2 days later. And I've been like, I'm doing a lot. So it's not like I'm not, fatigued or, it could have been a number of reasons, but what I'm saying is I sensed it. And then I started thinking about like how I do get on the bike a lot and I'll listen to music or I'll, watch something or whatever. And I was like, what I said to myself was like, that means you really don't care about getting better.
Ooh.
You really don't care about like getting better at the sport because you're not into what you're doing. And what you're doing is trying to get better and get better at cycling and get better, like you're saying, being responsive and being explosive and being in tune with the bike, because it goes back to what I said is like when you're outside, you're riding a bike more than you are letting the bike ride you. And I think we get into these trainer things where we're just not even there. We don't want to be there. So we have to get to a place where we want to be there and we actually want to work at getting better and doing things like you're saying, get that back, the back part of your pedal stroke engaged and messing around with shifting and explosion and just like riding a bike more on the trainer. And I know that's difficult, and I'm not saying I've always done it, but I'm just saying that was the realization that I came to, is like, it's like you're not really vested in this. And so I think that's the point we have to get to somehow, is like really committing to what we're doing. It's like dogs. Who's more in the moment than a dog? When they're playing, they're playing. When they're sleeping, they're sleeping. When they're eating, they're eating. When you're on a trainer, ride a bike.
So to recap here, the controversial statement is, if you listen to music, you're weak and non-committed.
Well, I just like, I don't
I'm just exactly. I'm just playing. No,
I'm just saying about myself too.
I don't know that I disagree. I think, and this is very similar, like listening to you talk through it, because I've had a few of those sessions too, like not in the last few weeks, but like the last month or two, where I've gotten on the bike, honestly, with the intention of like uploading my workout to, a platform and then just watching it structured. But I'll get on and then I'll just turn my Garmin on and I'll just start looking at it. And I'll start thinking through a few things, or like, responding to a few people, like via text message, and while I'm warming up, trying to multitask. And then when I get to the main set, I will use music, right? But I don't look at anything, and I just do, like, for me, I guess my version of that, not as like stoicism or stoic as yours, but I'll just look at my Garmin lap, and if I need to hold 220. I just literally stare at my watch for the whole 4 minutes, and make sure I'm not listening. I'm listening to a little bit of music, but I'm not watching. I'm just staring at my watch. And like, so, and to me, that's like, it's not to the degree you were doing, but like, I'm not chasing anybody virtually. I'm not watching like a motivational, video or whatever. It's just, I'm just like focused on the one thing that needs to be the one thing right now, which is hitting that watt. And but again, listening to you talk, it's very similar to like some of the conversations I have with parents who, their kids are doing like competitive club swimming, and there's 50 kids in the water with 2 coaches, and they just go there to work. They literally don't think about technique at all. They just get in the volume, get in the work. And then at some point you can't get any better because you're no longer focusing. Then you start to regress. And so like the focus part is like getting one-on-one swim help or getting an analysis. Like and you have to slow down. You're like, you might only do 500 in an hour, but mentally you might be more exhausted from that focused 1 hour than you were mentally, right, after an hour and 15-minute club swim. Now you may be more physically exhausted, right, because you worked. But there is, like, I think there's from a capacity standpoint, you have to understand, like, what capacity am I trying to focus on in this discipline today? And if it's high RPM, yeah, I mean, you should probably just, like, again, like, if you want to listen to music, but like, you should be able to just like, it should keep you engaged so long. You're like, I need to focus. Like, and it's no secret, right? The more present you are and the more focused you are, the better execution you have. And I also firmly agree, like, it's one of the biggest mysteries to me of life is why like gyms and really anywhere have the news on. Oh, one of the first thing I noticed, like when we used to go to like the Green Hills Y, this is like 15 years ago, and I go and hop on the treadmill, you look at like 16 TVs, every fucking one of them is on the news. I'm like, why in the world do we have this on right now? People are here to lower their blood pressure, lower their stress level. Hey, let's just hop on the treadmill and improve our health while we get the quick summary from the nightly news about all the horrific things happen in your local community. Oh, can't wait. Let's roll. No, it's mind-boggling to me. So I also do think, right? Same thing with going like, what you consume, right, adds stress. So whether you know it or not, and I do believe this, just like caffeine is a stimulant, I also believe that depending on your relationship with what you view, right? Or your relationship with what you hear and listen to, it is also a stimulant. But those stimulants also can come with a price, right? They come with the price of dependence. Caffeine, dependent, right? It's a drug, okay? Just like all of the drugs, like you can become dependent on caffeine. Like you wake up, you just a cup of coffee, or you're feeling tired. What do? You get more caffeine. Like it's hard to wean off caffeine, or weaning off caffeine is a very hard thing. So like you can become dependent on it. Just like you see people going back to some excuses. Oh yeah, I couldn't swim today, forgot my swim P3. You're like, excuse me? Like the last I checked, you didn't need those to swim. That's a luxury, right? Same thing goes with hopping on the trainer. You know, like your music can be your, something that you start to be dependent on. And I also do believe that, music can either raise or elevate your heart rate. Firmly believe that. Same thing with running. Like the best runs I've had are when I'm not listening to anything and you can hear your breath and you can hear your feet. Like that's when you're in the moment and you can control that and you kind of use your own signals of your body because you're in touch with it, right? And you're present and you can hear it and respond going up or down, right? Up effort, lower effort. Like with the music, you can't hear as much. You can't hear if you're just like slamming the pavement. You can't hear how hard you're breathing. You're more concerned about the device that's measuring your input and what it's giving you on the screen as an output. And I think, yes, like there's some correlation there, but as we all know, like it's not always right. And so like these are things I think you do have to consider. And I think it's a great point, right? Is, how dependent we are on so many things to get the right thing done the right way. Instead of just, like you said, being committed, right? And I'm a music junkie, so I raise my hand, but like I love listening to good music while I'm doing something. But it does have adverse effects. And so people are like, can you please change the music? You're ruining the mood. Like, why are you playing this right now? It's like because it does, right? It has that effect on you. And on race day, like, you can't use that, period. Like, yes, and you definitely shouldn't listen to music while you're riding your bike outside, but on race day, you're not allowed to, right? So you got to find, like, I do see it as a stimulant. And I think, like, these are things you have to consider, like you said, when you talk about, being committed. And yeah, do I think you can do that, most people, can they be as stoic and as purposeful as you're being about it? Probably not. But do I think there should be like a time and a place to probably do it and just kind of zone out and think like, hey, like, how long can I do this for? Because without any stimulant, or anything you're formally or usually dependent on, and I also believe there's like a meditative state you can reach in a lot of those that you can't reach with music or movies or virtual, platforms, because you're largely you're being responsive to what you see or you hear, right? Whether it's low, whether it's high, whether it's engaging, whether it's not engaging, whether it's exciting or not exciting, the beat, the tone, the competition, you become more of a responder, right? You're more on the defensive than you are on the offensive, right? Which is, to me, is listening to your body and doing what it needs to do and being able to find that on your own. As I was like, back when I was like in a huge trip, I think I did like 17, 18 miles on the treadmill once doing nothing, just like zoning out, period. I don't want to do that again, but that is, I think it's a great point, right? And it's another layer of focus of being just like you said, generally being focused to and committed to bettering a skill, and which is creating a habit that makes a routine, and that gives you confidence going forward, like we talked about a few weeks ago.
Yeah. Well, yeah, right. You're totally right. It is a stimulant. Anything's a stimulant outside. You talked about neuromuscular fatigue, and I've been on that big time lately. This idea that your brain thinking about different things takes a lot of energy, and we've sort of glorified multitasking in this day and age. And like it or not, when you're on a trainer and you're watching a movie, that's multitasking. And the thing that I like, okay, there's a place for it or what, and there's time, and I do it, and I've done it with, even with music. But the thing about it is, like, there's always something that happens in a scene or like in a movie or whatever, and that distracts you, or you get kind of invested in that, and you're not even on the bike anymore or whatever. or you hear a song and it kind of takes you back to high school, and the girl you broke up with, whatever. You're in like that stuff takes energy, in my opinion. So I'm just saying it's my goal, right? I don't know if I have it mastered. So I've been in and out of it. It's always like a process, and it's I like this multitasking thing, man. I mean, I don't know why that has become like a great thing. I think it's a terrible thing. It happens all the time, though. People are doing one thing. I mean, we're half vested in everything. You know what I mean? I don't care what it is. If you're doing one thing, you should be doing that. I mean, that's just my goal. And I think that it really makes sense. And I know that, and maybe and the thing, I grew up in an age when we didn't have any of this crap. So I was playing, baseball or whatever we were doing, basketball all day. There was no interruptions. We were just doing it. And that created, an ability to sort of just be in that moment. And I just think that, it's easy for me to always, I like thinking. I've always been sort of a theorist on being in the moment. I understand it intellectually, and, it makes sense, and I think it's the right thing to do, but like to live it and to really practice it is where I'm at with this. And, so maybe it's like, it's like anything else, man. It's difficult just to go cold turkey, so maybe it's like you said, maybe it's like, warm up without it. And then maybe in the intervals, if you need some, go for it, or some music, or maybe it's like cool down, turn on a movie and just chill or whatever. But I think it's worth exploring for sure, like.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, right? I was just like thinking, and maybe this is a good, goal for every athlete, this coming week or next week, is like, or just to ask yourself before you even go through the rest of your week, is when was the last time I heard myself breathe?
Yeah.
During your workout, right? Because if most people listen to music, right, when they're working out, they can't really hear themselves that unless they're like, in a like a really deep grunt, like, hey, I can hear you from upstairs. Like, this is, cut it out. Can't hear it in swimming, like in running. A lot of people listen to music, they can't really hear it. They can feel it somewhat, but a lot of times it's more muffled. So when was the last time you did a session, like that? And I think that's, again, like it's just a great, like you said, even if you're not going to go as deep on it as you are, and challenging yourselves in a variety of ways, which I think is great. At least maybe even just do a check-in and see where you are with it. What's your relationship with it? Can I wake up and do my 6 a.m. session without coffee? Can you get out the door later in the day and do a strength session without your pre-workout? Can you go out for your run without and honestly, sometimes people just doing it at a different part of the day. Oh, so you want to run in the morning? Go try running at 3:30. I don't run at 3:30. Well, I mean, you can, right? You're not like only held to be, like doing it at that point of the day. Like, challenge yourself again to get out of those comfort zones that we have become so dependent on. And then especially like triathletes, like we spend all this time and money and investment and energy into creating these like very rigid, rails and guardrails to stay in between. And we do it for our own protection. But the truth of the matter is that it honestly like usually ends up in our demise. Because you're never in control. When you race, you have no control, only of your effort and your execution. And so we spend all this time trying to create these perfect environments to train in, and then when something like barely goes wrong, it is the end of the world. It's in my goggles leaking. Go to Lost and Found, grab a new pair. Seriously, I think I've done it like 5 times. I mean, at one point, like I found one out of the Lost and Found that I used for like 2 years. They were a solid set of goggles. But, or my trainer's not working, or a Zwift crash, or like find a way.
Yeah, how adaptable are you?
Yeah, it's exactly how adaptable and how responsive are you? Because on race day, like to me, like that's one of my biggest pet peeves for parents after a game is the first thing is blaming on the refs.
Yeah.
Like that, I just fucking can't stand it. Like, I'm like, no, that is not the route we are going here. That is like the opposite of ownership. And so I like to use an analogy, like to me, like that's like, if you're what you should be, everyone should be anti, oh, let's blame the refs after every loss or every bad game, or we should have won. I'm like, no, you didn't. You shouldn't have won because you didn't. You can't blame on the refs. Just like if you're someone who gets easily interrupted and easily distracted or easily, set off course, ask yourself that. Adapt to that. Find ways to challenge yourself to be better at that. If the race is, going to change and it's non-wetsuit the last minute, or it is wetsuit the last minute, or a cold front comes in, or a warm front comes in, or it's windy, or your tire goes flat, or you drop your fuel, or you get a rock in your shoe, or, you lose a cleat bottom, or your saddle drops, or your bars are, messed up, or your zipper comes on the wetsuit. Like all these things can happen on a race day, and literally no one ever considers it happening or even practice that, because they spend the majority of their time, effort, and energy in creating the most perfect training environment possible. And what might make you at a certain points like physically weaker, physically stronger and more fit, but more mentally weak and unfit. And in my opinion, like, you have to be the most fit mentally to get the most out of yourself physically. And I think that is, again, just like one of the biggest things that you have to remember and focus on. I think it's, I think that, again, like, it's just something we don't ever look into. And listen, I get it. Like, you always have to measure your bandwidth and what you have the ability to focus on or not focus on. Like a large portion of us have, like, things going on in our life. And some days, like, you just ain't going to have it, right? You're just not going to have the bandwidth to focus. But when you do have it, don't waste it, right? Like, to me, like, it's very similar. Like, if you wake up and, like, let's say you get a day off, right? Which is weird. Or like an easy, like, swim, and you feel incredible. Maybe explore the boundaries of that a little bit, right? Don't go out for a 20-miler. But if you feel great, don't waste it, because you don't have any idea what you're going to wake up feeling like tomorrow. Same thing goes with, like, the mental stuff. Like, if you're having a rough day and your bandwidth is shot and you've had a long day at work and a long day with kids or spouse, whatever it is, like, maybe that time isn't today. Like, if you're just starting to practice this stuff. But if you're, like, mentally on it and you are firing on all cylinders, then give it a shot, right? And see. So again, I'm not saying, it's something to do every single day, but I think it is worth exploring. And again, just like we talked about these specific sessions and things to focus on to make your cycling, toolbox more robust, this is a great thing to do to make your mental toughness and resiliency and your adaptability, like that toolbox, more robust too. And I mean, it's better than anybody. It's like, if you're not there mentally and you don't have that toolbox, it really doesn't matter what your fitness is. It does not matter, because the mental part, you can't out mentally tough and outsmart most people on the race course, period. But you gotta have that skill. And so if you want to have that skill, you got to work on it.
Yeah, exactly, man. Just a quick thing to end with, as far as cycling skill, and you sort of talked about riding like a cyclist or an athlete, and you can sit around on the trainer and kind of hit numbers all day or whatever, but if you feel super uncomfortable on a bike in the outdoor or during a race, I mean, that's just not going to equate. It's like swimming too. You got to kind of get in open water and feel it and understand it, and be a swimmer and be a cyclist and be a runner, and kind of understand the skill of it, and then start working on, getting better at it. I just think it's really like a basic principle, in a sense, where, you can, if you're just like mechanical all the time, that doesn't really translate in races.
Yeah. No, the same. Apply it, look for it, work on it. It's another skill, right? Talked about cycling, talked about, what to do, like in the swimming and the cycling, and now, but the mental and emotional piece, like, this is, this is the time of year to do it. Again, hopefully when bandwidth, again, you can't ever, here's the thing, is like, we can't ever control, like, our our mental and emotional bandwidth to a large degree, just because depending on your level of responsibilities and the stressors and the obstacles you have in life, like you're kind of always on guard, and some days are easier, some days are harder. But physically, hours should be lower. Stress about the hours should be lower because you're so much, you're so far from a race. So, take this time, and like Mike said, if it's not just, maybe just start with the warm up, no music. And then maybe the next day start with like the warm up in the first rep or two without some music, or just do the main set with music and not the warm up or the cool down, or maybe make the cool down with music the reward. But it's funny because like listening to you talk and like just thinking about it, I was like, man, like once I get to the cool down, I always stop listening to music. Always, because I'm trying to like relax and cool down. I'm done. I take my earpods out and turn the music off. Doesn't matter if it's 10 or 15 or 20, no music, I'm done. And so I think that probably says a lot about like the effect. Like if I'm trying to relax, right? I don't want to be, listening to some Eminem or some Metallica. That's not gonna help the mood. I want to just like be with my own thoughts and then think through how the workout went and just kind of like, decompress for a minute. So again, it's a very good exercise. And I think I'll give it, I wouldn't say it's controversial. I would say most people are like, yeah, I'm not doing that.
Yes.
That's how I feel about caffeine. Okay. Like I'm not giving up caffeine. Like I do limit it. Like I haven't before, but yeah, I'm going to stick with it. As with all things, moderation is key. And the poison is in the dose.
Yeah, I agree, man. It's very interesting. I just know that that feeling, like sometimes like you get out there and you forgot your phone or the music or something, and it's kind of that, I don't, or like when you go to the pool and forgot your watch, it's like, why does that affect us? You know what I mean? It's just, I think the fact that we have that kind of feeling, that sinking feeling in our gut when we forget something that we want to use, that's the indicator.
Well, and we can close it out here, but like it's, you said it well. It's just like, it's almost, the effect that something has on us, like by not having it, and how we've now created ourselves to where we're so easily affected, is just like where two ends like meet, and that's why it's so difficult. Mm-hmm. Right? Like we most people now are affected so much and so easily by so many things, and then we also are so dependent on so many things. So when we don't have that and we depend on it, then that feeling is just exacerbated by the fact that we're now so easily affected, and it's just like it's just a compounding result in feeling an emotion that, again, it's probably a good thing to like, hey, why is this, maybe I should challenge this, why am I so deeply affected by this? And is that okay? Or is that, not that it's okay, but like, is that reasonable or is that unreasonable? If it's unreasonable, then, maybe I can explore, why it feels, or someone may be like, that's completely unreasonable.
Yeah. Yeah. And my thought is, music's really great for one thing, for sure, and that's dancing. So if you're going to use
I've seen some of you dance, and it ain't good for anybody.
Right. But like, it's always been my theory is sort of like, if you're on the bike and you're listening to music, dance with it, and dance on the run, like relax and kind of flow with it, not use it as a rocket fuel. And if you want, send us your, post in the closed Crushing Iron Facebook group video of you dancing on your bike. Be happy to, dancing on Bike Stars. Be happy to judge that and let you know. We'll judge it. Yeah, for sure. We'll crank up that Michael Bolton. Crank up that Kenny G. Boys to Men.
Boys to Men. That's right. Slide in a little Luther Vandross. If you really want to get rolling. Slide in a little Luther. You guys be much better off. No, as always, we love you guys. We appreciate you. Go to our website, c26triathlon.com. It is our one-stop shop for all things coaching, camps, and community. If you need anything from Mike, he's available. Mike at c26triathlon.com. If you need anything from me, Robbie at c26triathlon.com.
All right, man.
All right, dude. Take it later.
See you.